Okay, students, still in skirts. Today we're going to learn how to do a circle skirt or a fuller flare skirt. There's the half circle and the full circle. We'll be using the slash and spread method, but then I'll also show you how to do the pivot method. So you can find this information on page 246 in your textbook. The finished version is going to look something like this. We're going to be using the oak tag to cut because it's more stable for this demonstration. But in order to do this, you need to be able to identify first how long you want your skirt to be. And then you want to make sure that you have a big enough piece of paper that you could have a big square for the length of what that panel piece is. Circle skirts are more expensive because they have a lot of fabric consumption to them. So we're going to be talking about what you'd have more seams in here if you needed to slice the pattern in a marker. But to draft the fullness of the flare is what we're going to be dealing with today. We will be drafting a complete square. So again, establishing that grain line is super important. And the side seam to as a perpendicular line. So I'm going to show you. We're going to be taking our basic skirt front, and I'm going to just line it up to make it easy. We just want to trace it off because we're going to chop it up. So I'm going to line it up here with my edge of my paper. If you know that your paper is straight, work with those straight tools. And then I'm going to trace off my sloper in total. So waistband, dart legs. We'll be copying the apex of those darts using our awl tool. Side seam and bottom hem. You want to make sure you're transferring that hip line. And make sure that you're using your punching tool to transfer the dart apex of the darts so that we know where they are, because we, of course, are going to be using those to close off again. And here's my hip line that I transferred. Know that this is my center front. And now, just like we had done on our circle skirt, we're going to drop some plumb lines down through these dart legs. So making sure they're perpendicular with that hip level. It goes through the apex of that dart. And these are just going to be guidelines for us to slash on. And I want to make sure that line is perpendicular to the hem. Through the first dart, through the second dart, same thing, plumb line through the center of that dart apex, through my hip level, down to my bottom hem. I'm extending those two. So we have two here, but in order to get a nice full circle skirt, we can add more. So I'm going to go halfway between my center front and that first dart leg and mark. And we'll draft another plumb line, probably about 2 inches away. And these are really just slash lines. They won't be visible in the final design. Same thing here. You want to go about halfway. And we're going to drop that plumb line down, just as a guide on which to slash. Now we're going to cut this out, and remember these are going to be slashed up to back off about 1/8 of an inch, and that's what we're going to pivot to on our skirt. I'm going to cut this out. I'm using my heavier scissors for the oak craft paper here. Cutting on the line, using the table as my guide to make sure that my have enough leverage. Making sure that you're controlling your breathing as you're cutting so that you have a nice, even cut. This is where you're doing your yoga breath, controlling your weight. So we're going to slash on these lines here, but before I do that, I want to make sure that I'm marking on my point paper where I have enough room to draft the circle skirt to the fullness that I want. So you want to make sure you have a nice square area, and I'm going to use my L tool, and I'm going to draft. I'm going to flip this upside down so it'll be easier for you guys to see this one. So we're going to be drafting the circle I need equal width at the center front and at the side seam. We're going to be starting from the side seam and we're going to be blending around to this center front. So I'm going to use my L tool to draft my center front line. And that line goes up into infinitum, as does that. You can flip your ruler so that you maintain the same line. And you're going to be placing the center front aligned like this. And you want to make sure that the placement for your center front waistband from this corner is going to be the same as your placement here at this corner. So you want to make this about 3 or 4 inches from, you have enough room to do your curve. So I'm going to place this about 4 inches away. Can be a little bit more if you need. I mean, think about the consumption. And then I'm also going to mark 4 inches here. So I know that when I'm blending out my waistband, this is about where I want it to stay as far as the curve is concerned. Now I'm going to slash on my lines and make sure I cut out my dart so I don't get confused by them being there. So the dart intake, remove. And then we're going to slash from the bottom hem up to the waistband, or these darts, backing off about 1/8 of an inch so that we don't destroy the integrity of our skirt. We can hinge. So I'm cutting on that first panel, backing off about 1/8 of an inch. Cutting on this second panel, which is the plumb line from my first dart to that dart apex. Backing off about 1/8 of an inch. Cutting on my second plumb line to that dart apex. And then my last style line is going up toward the waistband. Backing off about 1/4 of an inch. All right, we're going to hook our skirt on the center front at that 4-inch mark and secure it properly. Then we're going to rotate these. So I'm pivoting the dart closed and I'm rotating them around. We're fanning them out in essence. until the darts are closed and that the waistband has come closer to that 4-inch mark. You will stop when your hip, side seam hip, hits the center back line. Side seam. Tape it down. And you're going to want to then blend, using your curve ruler, you want to blend these pieces back together. So some of it's going to be chopped out, but you're blending it back into this side seam panel. Remember that this needs to be perpendicular when it hits this side seam. And then you're using these pieces as a guide. This becomes your center front. This becomes your side seam. And just like our previous skirts, you'd have your waistband facing. You'd cut the front on the fold. You'd have your 1/2 inch for your side seam allowance, or 1 inch if you're going to put your zipper here in your side seam. You want to mark your 2-inch hem. You want to mark a notch for your hip for matching up purposes. Your grain line. So there's a lot of fabric here. If you just put your grain line here near the center front, that's not going to be enough for your production team to know where to lay it out. I would highly recommend that you not only mark this is the center front on the fold, but make sure that you're transferring your grain line over so that it's in the broadest part of your pattern piece. So that it's the most useful as far as matching up to your fabric, especially if this has a pattern or a stripe. You need to be able to identify the grain line of your garment. And that is how we cut the circle. So this was 80904. This was the circle skirt.